what were the circumstances that led you to leave Vietnam, and how old were you?
Yeah. So I left when I was 7, right? This is 1982. Um, and I'll look at some of my notes here, some of the specifics. But the circumstances were that basically, if you, because my father was a private in the with the South Vietnamese army, because of our political ties alone, we you have to have connections in Vietnam, right? If you're not with the Communist Party, you can't get the education or the job opportunities, right? But the weird thing with my family, my mom's side of the family, we have actually my oldest uncle is a really high-ranking communist official. So it's a split, and I think that's the case pretty much for a lot of Vietnamese families, where like half of your family, right, is communist, and the other half is not. And so there's that like infighting that happens within the families. And so for my mom, like even though like she comes from a family with money because they were all business people, very shrewd, and very frugal. Like that's something you need to know too. The stereotypes about the Northerners, the Central region folks, and then the South. So Bắc North, Bắc Trung is mid region, and then Nam is the South. They characterize the people. So my mom comes from a family. They're just like super cheap and able to save up a lot of money. And this is important in terms of the refugee experience because you need to have money in order to get people onto the boats. And it's $1,000 at this time per head per person, which is huge, right? And we're talking about they have to sell it in terms of gold and stuff like that. And so like just the fact that we even have the house in Saigon tells you that we have money, right? In contrast to like lots of other people. Um, so, but anyway, but the risk there was basically going to be my mom, right? Being a single mother of three, um, working at this cotton factory and just not getting, having no opportunities to get ahead. So it was basically you slowly die out here, right, as this non-entity if you remain in Vietnam, or you basically have to give in to the Communist Party and join, right? And which, by the way, my paternal side, my aunt did. She's like a multi-millionaire now over there. Just to give you an idea of like how far ahead you can get. And lots of people won't join, right? Just because of their desire for vengeance, actually, right? Because of their loss of families and stuff. Um, do you want me to go into like how we escaped? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, we so in the spring, early summer of 1982, my mom. So at that time, it's my mom, my stepfather. So my stepfather entered the picture. Um, uh, Actually, this is interesting. So I'll share a story with you that actually led my mom to just risking her life. My mom was stabbed 22 times by a neighbor. So this will illustrate to you the craziness of life there, right? Yeah. Um, I mean, it's very much driven by materialism, right? Just a way to eke out a living. So the circumstances, this is prior to us escaping, is that my mom had received a telegram from my uncle from the States, from California. And the neighbor had assumed that if you receive something from the States, like anybody who comes from the States is like deemed like you have money, you have connection, etc. So the neighbor thought that we came into a good amount of money, right? Which was not the case. Like there was just nothing to that telegram. But the neighbor basically climbed onto the rooftop and basically entered our house, our like rectangular house, through the kitchen. There's like an opening. But basically, my mom suffered such trauma from the attack, and I mean, she's just a fighter. Though she broke all of his teeth, she fought, and the 20 stab wounds. Luckily, the majority of them were all shallow stab wounds, right? The guy like waited for my mom when she got up to like cook for us, like for the day, right? Luckily for me at the time, I didn't witness the trauma, but my two older siblings did. I was like with my grandmother, like in Bomsung. And so my mother was stabbed, and she ended up being in the hospital for like several months, and she lost like half her body weight. Like she's my size. I'm like barely 5 and like 110, right? She lost, like, she was just at like 50, 60 pounds. And so, but she really lucked out. Like one stab wound was just like an inch from her heart. Um, and so but anyway, just to illustrate to you the craziness, like, and the guy was captured ultimately, and he landed in prison, but he's been let out like for the last 10 years. And so like it was my uncle who caught him, right? Like and my uncle like lived near us and heard the screams. And my two siblings who witnessed all this, like they hid behind a door, right? So the three sections from the bedroom, because they heard my mom screaming and stuff. And so, just to give you an idea of the motivations for people in terms of the atrocities they committed, and then the traumas, right? The traumas for people like my mom and my siblings, the things they witness, right? I think my oldest sister probably witnessed the most, and like there are things that she cannot process, and it's just been blocked out. Like, I mean, she's witnessed my mom's the stabbing. She also witnessed my mom trying to commit suicide after the war when she didn't have like my dad there to help us. And that's another thing. Like just like yeah. And so you have like so the direct trauma, and then the secondary trauma, right, from just the witnessing. Um, I was very like weird way. I was blessed in that I was like saved from having to witness it directly like that. And so a lot of it I hear, and then it gets played out in my family. But anyway, so that's the scenario there for when we finally escaped, right? $1,000 per head. It included my mom, my stepdad, my two siblings, and me. I was 7, my brother 9, my sister 10, and then an uncle. And so at that time, my dad had already attempted unsuccessfully 2, 3 other times without my mom. So like the way that it would work with this is that you just can't send a whole family onto the boat, because if you're unsuccessful, you're basically screwed, right? You come back and they put you in a prison. They just all know, right? So you have to have a way out. But my stepfather is just not as shrewd as my mom. He was just unsuccessful over and over again, trying to take my two older siblings first. And then my mom at one point just said, to hell with this. We're just gonna we're basically gonna sell our house. We're gonna take the risk here and go with it. And then if we are unsuccessful, we're just gonna land ourselves in jail and do the best we can in terms of getting ourselves out. So that fateful night was really interesting. We all went down to Vũng Tàu, which is the south. Vũng Tàu is it's a fishing port at that time, and so it's right across from the police station, and which is so interesting. Like it's one of the most dangerous areas. And we hid in this factory right across from the police station, and then we had to wait until the signal was given, um, and for us to like get out onto this 30-footer. Right, we had a group of about 49 people for this like fishing boat. It's a 30-footer. And I remember, I mean, for me, it was just like, I had no clue. So my mom was very smart. She didn't tell us anything, right? Just so that like if we were captured and they asked us, we just had nothing to divulge. So I remember my mom packing like rice balls and stuff like that, and then just instructing us like, whatever happens, we get captured by the police, I'm just gonna run, right? And like, and then telling my dad there to take the kids or whatever, or like we had information about our address and stuff like that. But like she said that she basically just needed to not be with us so that she could find a way to get us out. Because if we all got caught together, we were going to be in trouble. So I think like I don't know, in the wee hours of the early morning, maybe 2 a.m. or something like that. We were given the signal, and then my uncle and my family and I, we all like got onto the fishing boat, but like into uh, the basement compartment, right, the cabin. And I just remember like we were probably there like with the 40 plus other people for maybe 3 4 hours, and there was just like vomit and like it was just disgusting, right? But we had to hide from the communist eye in order to get out into international waters. And so, but what's interesting about the boat trip though, like for me as a kid, I just thought it was like we're on vacation. It was exciting. I had no clue, right? My poor mom and dad, they're just worried about everything else. And for us, and I think there's a lot of idealism too, naivete with the 49 people, because like it's scary, but it's also an adventure and possibilities, right? Um, and so we were out in the high seas, and we had a destination. We had Singapore as the destination. And we were out there for about 5 days, and we ran into a big ship from Tokyo, right? Had we been smart, we would have like they asked us if we wanted to hop on, basically, right? We had we been smart, we would have been like taken over to Japan, and I would be speaking Japanese now. And but the everybody on the boat had a vision of Singapore, that they were going to go to Singapore, and that was our destination. And so we declined like the offer from the Japanese. And so they asked us what we wanted, and we were so clueless. We didn't ask for staples and stuff like that. We were asking for like baked goods, like cookies, and it was like it was just it didn't even dawn on us, because the stories of the horrors of the high seas here, we didn't really hear about until much later on, right? About the pirates, the rape, the the cannibalism, right? I so one of my friends from high school, his father like had to like let his kids like suck on his blood because they were so dehydrated. And I mean, just like these horror stories. uh, for my family, we really lucked out because the Pacific was super calm at that time, and we didn't run into any pirates. And when the 4 or 5 days we were out in the open sea, people were playing the harmonica, like would stop the boat and jump in for a dive and stuff. And there was this guy named Long Getyim. Getyim means sink, right? He was so happy-go-lucky. He just didn't even think about the fact that he didn't know how to swim. He jumped in, and we had to save him. So it gives you an idea of like how idealistic and crazy, like right? Somehow we just thought everything was going to be lined up, and fate was going to be on our side. So anyway, past the Tokyo ship, don't need you guys. And then when we got to Singapore, they turned us away. So something that's very interesting about the post-Vietnam War is that lots of countries were very kind, right? Especially the US. I think the US felt really guilty about its role in the Vietnam War. And so many countries were willing to help out. And so like the struggles that refugees and migrants have now, right? We just didn't have, because there was just open arms, right? After 1975, come, we welcome you, etc. But then with the years, though, the resentment increased, right? That too many immigrants, refugees were coming in and taking jobs, yada, yada. And so, but that didn't happen. Like, so the year that we left, it was still very welcoming. Um, but for Singapore is actually just really strict. So they turned us away, and then at that point, we didn't know what to do. And so we were just out in the high sea for more days, and then we ran out of oil. And then it got really scary. And it was actually with my mom. My mom was the one. She's something pretty feisty leader. She demanded that the captain of the ship here let us off whenever he saw land, and she didn't care what. She was now starting to worry about dying on the high seas. And so at one point we spotted this island, and we call it Coconut Island. I think it's called Parakeet or something like that, off the Riau Islands of Indonesia. And so my mom demanded that my uncle swim in, because they're afraid of like smashing against the rocks, and then lots of people died that way. Right, they would spot land, but then they couldn't make it in because their ship would just smash, against the rocks, and then everybody would drown. So my uncle came in to reconnoiter the area and to see that it's safe. Um, and then my family followed, and then everybody on the ship. And as a result, everybody's saved. So we really lucked out that way. And then we were like there in this island for a week before we were then transported to Galang refugee camp, right, which is like the main refugee camp in Indonesia. Some 250,000 refugees passed through Galang, Indonesia. I think it closed in 1996, and or is it 1992? I think 1996 officially, but in 1992, I think there was when there was like threats of like sending people back who hadn't been absorbed by the other countries. People committed suicide. They did not want to go back to Vietnam. Like they, yeah. So, and then so we're so Galang is made up of three parts, um, like a communal part. We were there for 8 months, and then there's like another like a so the Galang Mo 1, 2, 3 basically. The first the first part where we're there for 8 months is that we were living in these barracks, right? These army barracks with all these other families. And you can just envision like, it's another rectangle with two platforms on the two sides, and the families basically, had a section portioned off for themselves, right? And so we just lived like that for 8 months, and then later on we had our own private quarters. And it depends on your sponsorship, right? If you're lucky, like we were lucky. We had family in the U.S. My stepfather's brother was a pilot in the war, and in 1975 he was able to or immigrate to the U.S. So he has a family over there, and he sponsored us. And because we have sponsors, it was faster. Those who didn't stay there for years, right? Especially the single people, right? They just had no anchors. And so 8 months in Galang 1, we moved to Galang 2 when our sponsorship papers progressed. And that's when we actually had private quarters, for our family, with the gardens that other families from before had left behind. Um, and life is actually very, like for me as a child, very bucolic. Right, I really enjoyed the sun. I enjoyed torturing the island animals, like capturing lizard, and just doing fun things. Basically, every day was an adventure. And I don't know what life must have been like for my parents, but my mom was just very shrewd as a businesswoman, and I remember that it wasn't lacking. Like a lot of people were lacking in terms of their diets, because I remember a lot of spam. There was spam and stuff that people would donate, but my mom was able to trade in what we would produce in the garden. So we had veggies, and then we got eggs, and so she was able to trade. She was just very smart, and then she was always sneaking out to different places all the time. I remember this, in order to bring back things, so for us to enjoy. And so life was just, yeah, it was very fun for me. Just hang out with my brother. Like crazy things would happen though. Like, we'd like capture like sewer rats in cages, right? And then like pour gasoline and set them ablaze. Yeah. Oh, and I knew you'd like that one. Yeah, and like, yeah, I like get into fights. I remember like just, yeah, like again, like that life of my parents were off doing their thing, and we are just left to their own devices, right? And you wouldn't even recognize me. Like, I mean, like my skin was so dark, being out in the sun all the time. And yeah, my brothers. And so just lots of crazy things. But the rat burning is actually for sanitation as well, like because you didn't want them to get into your food supply and stuff like that. And then there's also like a lovely sense of community with the Catholics. So so a big part of my background, like that I love, that's rooted in the spiritual grounding, was my connection to Catholicism. Right, so there were a number of different religious groups there, Catholics, but also Lutheran. right? So the Lutheran did lots of charity with all these refugee camps. They would actually provide things like silent movies for the communities, right? The Charlie Chaplin movies. I remember them distinctly. And then we're all part of the Catholic groups, and so like we wore. I don't know, you wore those bandanas that like they look like ties and stuff like that, and you have the different colors designating your levels and stuff. And so community was very much rooted in Catholicism and our various roles. And I think that was actually really nice for my family and for the others who weren't originally very religious, right? And so yeah, those are different aspects of admin life. And oh, also, we had English classes. This is also very funny, Owen. It's hilarious that I'm an English teacher. My mom was my first English teacher, and we know some examples of the things she taught us. Completely mispronounced everything, right? Like the word market, right? It would be she taught us to say maquette. Refrigerator would be like refrigerator, right? And so you just imagine, right? So that was our preparation for immigration to the U.S. In terms of the English skills. So, but anyway, so another 5 months in Galang High 2, and I mentioned Galang 3, which is a cemetery. So very ominous in that sense. And I think the Galang 3 is like in between the 1 and 2. So if you weren't so fortunate as to be sponsored and to immigrate, yeah, you just die there at the camp.